Hi, I'm Jim.
And I'm Sam.
And we are the Libbies. Because I'm a libertarian.
And I'm a liberal. And we're solving the world's problems.
One argument at a time. Welcome to the show. I'm Jim.
And I'm Sam.
So this is the first ever episode of the Libbies. On this show, we'll take different philosophical and political topics from current events or that we simply find interesting, and we'll try to tackle them from our two different perspectives. Sometimes we'll agree, usually we won't, but this show is our sort of answer to the single-speaker political talk show radio genre of media and political coverage. We wanted to make this show originally because we both have many opinions and we like to argue with each other, but we didn't want to create an echo chamber kind of like you see in the normal talk show radio scene. We wanted to produce a show where the listener really did get to hear both sides of an argument. So with that said, we're very happy to have you here listening in, and we know you'll enjoy the podcast and have fun and hopefully learn something with us along the way. Now, normally this is where we would address any listener feedback from our previous episodes, which you can send to our email, thelibbies@gmail.com, or tweet us at thelibbies. But for the first few episodes, since they're being recorded well before you're hearing this, there's no feedback. So we'll just dive right into the show. In our first ever main topic discussion on this show, let's try and cover something pretty high level. Hopefully through this conversation, we can give the listener a little better feel for where each of us stands in the political spectrum and how we're going to approach arguments in the future. I guess the question for us to tackle is whether or not it is appropriate for laws to equal morality. If so, why? If not, how much morality should be present in your legal system?
So I have to ask, you picked this topic, and normally when we have discussions like this, we don't have bullet points in front of us, do we?
You might not.
Do you have bullet pointed arguments that you are just throwing at me at lunch, like without telling me?
I practice arguing just all the time. That's really what I do sitting in my cube. Is I'm not doing work. It's just soliloquy after soliloquy in my head playing. Yeah.
In your head. That's the key. That's the key component.
My cube neighbors don't have to listen to me rant, wax philosophical at myself. No.
Okay.
They would fire me immediately.
I never have bullet points for our discussions. So usually what happens is Jim poses a seemingly innocuous question. I do my best to answer it, and then Jim quickly pulls the philosophical rug out from underneath me with his massive amounts of preparation, and I have to take a moment to collect myself.
The word is pronounced innocuous. There is no L in innocuous.
Jim also likes to correct my grammar and pronunciation along the way. Can we all agree that there should be a name for the disorder whereby you don't use all of the vocabulary that you've read until you try to pull out a word that you think you remember from a book that you've never heard spoken and just throw it into the conversation where you know it goes, and you put an L in the word innocuous, and then it distracts your conversation partner.
Is that the specific symptom of the disorder that you mispronounce the word innocuous?
No, not just the word innocuous, like general words that don't show up in everyday conversation.
Like a cross. Mm-hmm.
A word that I normally pronounce with a T at the end of it. I am working diligently to purge that incorrect T from my vocabulary now that it has been pointed out to me.
Not so subtly, yeah.
No, not so subtly. In the manner with which you just pointed out my incorrect pronunciation of innocuous.
So what are your feelings? Do you think we need laws that reflect our morals or morals that reflect our laws?
That's a good place to start. I think in an ideal world, we obviously wouldn't have to have laws, right? Because everybody would be kind to each other and not take more than what they ought to and not try to screw anybody else over. And we'd all abide by the general life philosophy of don't be a dick, and everything would be rainbows and sunshine and unicorns. But we don't live in that world, unfortunately. And that's why we need laws, because people aren't moral left to their own devices. That's kind of like oversimplified, but that's kind of how I came at this question when you proposed it. We have, it seems obvious to me that we have laws because people have obviously demonstrated that they can't be trusted to be moral without them. And everybody has a different definition of what they'd like to say is moral or isn't moral. The point of making laws is to, as a group, concretely say, whether or not you personally agree on it, these are the things that we all need to behave according to if we want to live in a functional society. So we're going to make them a law, and we're going to punish you if you don't follow it. That's my take on laws and morality. Laws exist to protect society from individuals who would abuse society, and individuals from the rest of society who might take advantage of them for whatever socioeconomic reason.
I think I agree with you on a number of things, but you said a couple things that I want to kind of grab onto. You said one thing, you said, if you don't follow these rules we give you, we'll punish you. And I think that's a topic that is far too complex for this discussion, but I think maybe as a future episode we should cover prison and what its actual role is and should be. You made mention that laws are the kind of collective agreement of what is and isn't moral. I keep using the word moral in this context. Moral implies some cosmic significance. I don't really want to go down that rabbit hole, but let's just use the word moral as the set of behaviors which everyone believes is acceptable.
Good. Moral in this case meaning goodness.
Okay, we're going to have to define goodness now.
I'd rather not.
Yeah, see, now you're getting into the realm. I mean, all of this is subjective, but you're getting into the realm of the highly subjective.
Well, we wouldn't want to go there, would we?
No, not at all.
God, no.
Only want concrete facts.
Yep.
I feel that laws exist to do exactly one thing. I feel that laws are designed to restrict the set of behaviors from which members of society have to choose. And I don't think it's any more cosmically important, any more flavorful than that. Laws don't exist to enforce morals. Laws exist to force people to behave predictably so that society can make decisions without needing to pander to the baser fears and needs. I'll give you an example. So there are behaviors that a person can take that pretty much all reasonable people would agree should be illegal and are wrong. These are things like violent acts. These are like robbery, murder, economically violent acts, so like breaking and entering, things of that nature. Defrauding acts, so that's more white collar, but that's basically fancy theft. Selling a product that ultimately kills people or causes permanent injury without letting the buyer know that there's a risk. These kinds of things should be illegal. Some other things should be illegal are obviously things like behaviors that even unintentionally cause physical harm or economic harm, but really physical harm is the easy low-hanging fruit here. So that's involuntary manslaughter, DUI, building a nuclear bomb in your backyard out of smoke detectors.
Is that wrong? Should we not do that?
So therein lies the question, is it illegal versus is it wrong?
Oh, I'd said wrong. I specifically meant to say illegal in that context. But that's the thing, right? We often use these words interchangeably.
Right, and I don't think we should. So all of those behaviors are either wrong, murder, theft, or should at least be illegal. DUI, building thermonuclear devices without a permit.
I was kidding, by the way. I'm not building thermonuclear devices with or without a permit.
But if you were, you would certainly have a permit.
Yeah. Right? Because I don't want to break the law.
I hope that's not a thing, right? Like, do you need a permit to build fissionable devices? Like, surely there is a permit that, like, somebody at a nuclear power plant has to have the permit to allow them.
Right. Like, that plant has a piece of paper that says you
can split atoms.
Yeah. You guys can do this thing, but not unless you have this piece of paper in front of you that says you can do that.
It's got to be the world's most dangerous diploma. So there are those behaviors that are everyone can agree are wrong or should be illegal, but there are behaviors that are not so easy to pin down. And I'll use behaviors that are currently legal in the United States, but I think everyone would agree are wrong. So the big fish here is adultery, cheating on your spouse being the easy example of that.
Of a thing that's not illegal but is wrong?
Yeah, like in general, you should be faithful to your spouse.
Yeah.
There are very few scenarios where, okay, maybe you shouldn't be, but usually I would argue you ought to be faithful to your spouse. There's no law that says you have to, and there's no law that says you don't.
Well, there's no law for or against it, but that's going to be pretty damning evidence in your favor if you take that to a divorce proceeding. So it does have a legal element associated with it.
In civil law, but it's not illegal. There's no legal action someone can take against you to stop you from doing it or to punish you for it.
Except divorcing you. They can divorce you.
Sure.
Like, that's the legal ramification for adultery.
But an individual has to do that. The state can't do that.
Sure.
That's the difference. The state can't force you to get divorced because you committed adultery. Your partner can decide to divorce you, right? But that is ultimately a private decision and only has legal ramification in as far as your marriage license becomes void. But you can't go to prison for it. And that's really what we're talking about. We're really talking about criminal law.
So you're just completely segregating your definition of law here. Why don't you break it down for me and make it painfully obvious?
Criminal law is the subsection of legal action that pertains to behaviors that the state prohibits. So these are behaviors that if you do them, it does not take a private individual to punish you for it. If you murder somebody, it does not matter if the people around you
decide to take you to court for that. The state will take you to court for that.
The state does it independent of your neighbors, exactly.
Yeah.
If you cheat on your wife, it doesn't matter if all of your neighbors try to take you to court. The state can't do anything about it.
Until she takes you to court.
But when she takes you to court, you're not being tried by a jury. You're not even being tried by anyone. You are convincing a judge to void a piece of paper using a behavior like adultery as evidence, right? Adultery is not the crime. There is no crime, in fact.
Okay.
It's merely being used as an argument in a process. Whereas if I murder somebody, whether or not I murdered somebody is the process.
Okay.
Right? There are other substantiating facts that are used to prove or disprove that I murdered somebody. But that I murdered somebody is the whole point. Whereas that I cheated on my wife isn't the point. It's the evidence.
I can see how you're distinguishing those things. This might change my argument slightly.
So there are behaviors like that that are wrong, but not illegal, criminally so. Let's keep it criminal here. So I'm going to argue that there are things that are legal and otherwise wrong that should remain legal.
Just to be clear here, you're arguing that adultery should remain legal.
Yes.
Okay.
I also think that lying, not slander.
Or perjury.
or perjury. Those are all objectively harmful things and therefore should be illegal. But lying, in general, should be legal. Selfishness, a thing that's hard to define but is probably collectively agreeable to be wrong, should be legal. Insulting someone, legal. This one's going to be divisive, but racism on an individual level, while wrong, should be legal. You have the right to be wrong.
So, I want to relate what you're saying here back to something that I was trying to say earlier. What you're describing, these are all very individual behaviors, which on an individual level aren't going to have far-reaching societal impacts. Racism is still wrong, but one person being particular about that isn't going to make or break society. The reason we pass laws against behaviors that stem from these attitudes is because on a societal level, people absolutely do get their lives destroyed over these things. And so you get laws against selfishness, which is to say, what's it called when the Fed comes in and breaks up a company that has a monopoly on a market? A thing which I'm sure you would not support.
Trust busting.
Trust busting. That's basically legal intervention against selfishness, right?
In not so many words, yeah. I'm going to make the argument that specific example is a good example of how things that are legal for individuals don't scale well, and that making large conglomerates of people function as individuals legally is problematic.
On that one we will wholeheartedly agree, I believe.
While I am ever the capitalist libertarian, I do have problems with making corporations people, and so I would agree. Trust busting, yeah, that's a good practice to have. It's going to be very difficult to have consistent legal application of a singular logical rule that scales from individuals to large corporations, or from individuals to large organizations that are, whether for or not for profit is largely irrelevant. You get a group of people that is large enough and holds enough sway that you run into problems like this. So I'll agree with you there.
It's perhaps not the most useful example for our conversation. But maybe this example is more useful. So if there are no laws against racism, what's to stop a small business owner from refusing to serve someone of a particular race that they don't happen to find agreeable?
Not a thing.
What do you mean, not a thing?
There is nothing stopping them.
Ah, well, that's a problem.
Why?
If you are a business...
I'm not, for the record, I'm not arguing that it's not a problem on a very individual level. That's not what I meant. It's definitely a problem there. It does suggest some problems with your personality and your set of morals, if you are.
Sure, I'm imagining in this scenario a bakery owner for some reason. I don't know why.
No, not that that's topical.
And a bakery owner is refusing to sell a wedding cake to an interracial couple. You can pick any two races, and this metaphor still works. It's not a metaphor. It's a illustrative something. Allegory?
Well, an allegory is illustrative in nature, yes.
An allegory is like a cautionary tale.
No, an allegory is a fictional story whose characters and events are parallels to some other story or scenario.
Or to real life, because then allegory is definitely the word I was looking for. If you're the bakery owner in this allegory, you are a bad person. But
Sure.
also, you have taken your bad personness into the public sphere by opening a business. And now that you're in the public sphere, well, by golly, society has got a right to dictate your behaviors because that's what laws do. And now you have to sell that wedding cake to that interracial couple, no matter how much your disgusting human soul doesn't care for it.
I completely disagree with you. I could not disagree with you more on that.
Okay.
You're a small business owner. You are in no way in the public sphere at all.
You're trying to make money from the public. That's the point of having a business.
But it's a privately owned business. You may do with it what you will. Your privately owned business legally functions no different than your privately owned car or your privately owned house or your privately owned
Disagree.
dinner table.
I disagree.
Your business is your property.
So then, what would be to stop, say there's a whole town of horrible racist people, and they change all of their businesses in the town to be private businesses, even the Walmart, because every town has a Walmart. Or maybe this town doesn't. Maybe this town is so small they don't have a Walmart. They change all their businesses to privately owned businesses, and now nobody of any race besides the one of those business owners can get anything from that town. But there are people of different races that live there. What happens to those people now? Who's looking out for their interests? This is what I was hinting at earlier. Laws are there to protect individuals from a society of let's face it, we're all mostly terrible people in one way or another.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, and we ought not be allowed to perpetrate our terribleness on individuals. There should be some protection from the terribleness of society for individuals, because you have minority groups, you have people that aren't the typical makeup of any sample size of society, and those people, when you have a majority and a minority, it's real easy for the majority to gang up on the minority. And I think that to some extent, laws are meant to prevent us from doing that to one another.
I can provide you with, I would argue, a better alternative to making racism illegal.
A thing which, of course, we can't do, so we just continue to try to sector off. Like, we're trying to, we know we can't say racism is illegal and we'll haul you off to jail if you're a racist.
No, because that would be thought crime.
We keep trying to make laws that, like, hem them in anyway. Like, you must sell all of your goods to all people, and you must employ all people of all colors and nationalities, and we just keep trying to, like, hem in this societal problem. We're doing our best to combat it legally without actually declaring thought crimes. What's your alternative? I'm excited to hear about it. This is going to be good.
This may be the last time I ever make this suggestion, but I think it's a better suggestion. Incentivize inclusiveness. Don't de-incentivize exclusivity. So what I mean by that, we already sort of do it, albeit poorly, in the housing market. Create a system in which including other groups, in our specific case, it's selling them goods, is advantageous in some way. Now, it's hard to do that with a grocery market, but
is it? I mean, you can easily collect demographic information of the area surrounding a business.
well, you can't charge the black people less money than you charge the white people, or differently from what you charge the Asian people.
No,
or
but
more
you could
money than you
give-
charge American Indian. You can't.
You could give the business owner a tax break for opening a bakery in a in a Latino neighborhood as opposed to opening that same bakery in a whitewash neighborhood.
Yeah, sure, fine. Those are practices that I would argue are better practices than legally enforcing required salesmanship. If you can make a law that forces a business owner to serve all demographics, I can imagine a scenario where, let's say I'm a business owner and I'm in the middle of selling something to someone of some race, of some ethnicity, of some minority group, whatever. And they wish to purchase something, and I, for some reason, need to immediately close the shop before I can sell them something. Okay, in your world, even though this is probably an unlikely scenario, it is a scenario that would no doubt occur several times. In your scenario, it is now the onus of the business owner to prove that the reason they closed shop at that moment wasn't for diversity reasons or anti-diversity reasons.
A thing that I would think they could easily do by offering
How do you prove the contents of your heart?
Offer earnestly to make an appointment for another day, maybe, opening earlier or later for the customer's convenience if you really want their business.
Right. So if you really want their business, but what if you don't care? Right? You have the right to be a poor business person. Why is refusing service on the grounds of hatred worse than refusing business on the grounds of laziness? And how can you, as the outside observer, know the difference? Right? You can't make it illegal for someone to be bad at their job. We'd be throwing people in prison every day for being bad at their job.
No, but you do have to make sure that as the overlords of your fictional society, that all of the members of your society can find access to all of the things that they need. And that means that at least one business has to be open, serving people of all colors that's easy enough for them to get to.
Right, but I think that's a system that is emergent. I don't think that's a system you have to construct explicitly. I think that's the emergent consequence of money working.
I think there is a significant portion of the demographic that vividly remembers the 1950s and 60s that would disagree with you.
They do, but I think that's a different problem. I don't think the ultimate problem there was people deciding not to serve people, right? That was an emergent consequence of a bigger problem.
Right.
That bigger problem being that historical scenarios and situations had led to a particular minority being economically disadvantaged. And being economically disadvantaged as a collective means that you do not have the resources as a collective necessary to build around the barriers in front of you. It's hard to overcome such a barrier because you had been started I'm not going to say you'd been started at the bottom of the playing field. You had been started under the playing field where everyone else was actually on the playing field.
That, I would argue, is still a problem. Fortunately,
But
not in my life.
But not the problem we're trying to solve here, right? And it's a problem that is...
I think in trying to solve this problem that we're trying to solve here, which is how much, if any, morality do you bake into your legal system, I think what I'm trying to illustrate is you very quickly get into hairy issues where you would like to have your personal freedom cake and eat it too, but you can't eat your personal freedom cake on the public park bench. It's your personal beliefs have to kind of go into a little box when you walk out your front door in the morning, and you have to put on society's beliefs if you want to exist in society. And some people have a problem with that. And for those people who just refuse to do that, we have laws dictating that they must do that for the protection of society.
You're not wrong about having to filter yourself through the lens of whatever the particular social constructs that you have to abide by are. You're not wrong there. And I think there are places within the legal system where solving, we'll just say, discriminatory practices is possible and preferable. But I'm going to argue that place isn't punishing negative behavior. It's reinforcing inclusive behavior. And I think you would find that post-civil rights movement, if you could somehow quantify the positive results of sanctioned reinforcement of inclusive behavior, you would find that those results are in larger magnitude than the results from punishing individuals or businesses for discriminatory behavior. I think you'd find better results, more results, and ultimately more successful results from the positive reinforcement side than the negative reinforcement side.
I mean, that I absolutely have to hand to you as just a fabulous idea, because that makes sense from every angle of human behavior. Let's use the carrot at first and just reserve the stick for when it's necessary. It's just lead the mule of society forward with a carrot, and we'll reserve the beating stick for those particularly obstinate members of society. I think we could apply both of these solutions at the same time and maybe eventually, hopefully, phase out one of them. Obviously, phasing out the punishment phase, phasing out the punishment aspect as opposed to the reward aspect. Like, I would much rather we could reward people. Actually, nope, scratch that. I would much rather people just weren't dickheads to each other. That's what I would rather.
Yeah, well, that's the whole point, isn't it?
Right. Yeah.
So now I have to ask you the question, what do you do about morally ambivalent behaviors?
I know you, and therefore I know you have an example of such behavior.
What do you do about people who use drugs? I don't mean people who use drugs and then murder someone, or people who use drugs and then steal from people to further their drug habit. Those are already illegal for other reasons.
Right.
I mean, what do you do with somebody who has fun on the weekends by smoking marijuana?
Let them have fun on the weekends by smoking marijuana. I think the war on drugs and the laws that have been passed because of it, and especially the egregious prison sentences that are handed out as a result, are just garbage. Just examples of societal garbage.
Mm-hmm. I agree. But now let's take that a step farther. You have that opinion about marijuana. What do you do with people who use heroin? Still just a plant.
Yeah.
The fact that you hesitated there illustrates my point entirely. There is not consensus socially. In fact, there's very far from consensus socially. I don't think you'd find a majority in either camp who can agree whether or not drug usage is moral.
I was listening to someone the other day, and they said when a poll is given, if you trust your polling population and you don't have just a landslide, people are highly in favor of option A over option B. If people are kind of split 50-50, then that's a really good indicator that you haven't provided the winning option yet. Because if you had, people would obviously be in favor of it. And I think they kind of had a good point. Maybe we don't have a good option C yet. I hesitated because I'm thinking of all of the crime that arises from the secondary market that's had to be constructed in order to fulfill the need of that drug to its users. And I'm thinking if that drug were legal, or at least not illegal, then those secondary markets could operate more above the board and with taxes and regulations, and maybe fewer people would get hurt, but then it's easier for everybody to get this drug that kills a lot of people, but fewer people would die because it would be regulated.
Well, so you touched on something there that I think goes very well with the morally ambivalent genre of behaviors, and that's, you said, what if it were legal, or rather not illegal?
Yeah, I did say that.
There are two kinds of laws in the criminal sense. There are laws that expressly prohibit a particular action, right? Don't commit murder. Here are the types of murder. Don't do these. You have another set of laws that are laws that expressly allow or grant rights. These are your laws that say explicitly thing A is legal, expressly recognizing a right that a group already has in order to emphasize that right. Now, I come from the camp that would say, if it is not expressly prohibited, you may do it as you please. What's your stance on, and this really ties into moral ambivalence in law, there are those behaviors that no one can agree are right, but are, let's say, currently illegal. Do you need to make them legal, or can you just remove their illegality? I don't think you need to make them legal. And I would say there are behaviors that are morally ambivalent that are legal, right? But there's not a law that says you can do them. Do you need, for certain behaviors, a special set of rules that allow you to do them?
Like, the knee-jerk reaction to that statement is, well, duh, of course you don't. I don't need to explicitly be told that I can drive my blue car on a Tuesday. I just assume that all other things being equal, and there's no flashing red and blue lights behind me, I can drive my car on whichever day of the week I choose, regardless of its paint job. So, and I think maybe this is the I don't know, maybe I deviate from my liberal background here, but I would probably say we don't need laws making most of those ambivalent behaviors illegal. And then we should handle the ramifications. Like, if we don't make them illegal, and then we as a society have a come together moment where we have to sit down and recognize, hey, this thing is bad, we should probably outlaw it, then we'll cross that bridge when we get there, I guess.
I mean, isn't that what we've already done that, though, with drugs, let's say. There are behaviors that arise from drug addiction that are already very, very illegal. Yeah. Why do you need an extra layer of illegality on top of that?
So I guess society already had like its heroin come together moment, probably round about the turn of the century, if I had to guess. Prior to that, you could, of course, just use opium whenever you wanted.
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah, that was just a thing that people did.
Let's say you're a heroin addict and you murder somebody, okay? You should obviously be tried for murder.
Yeah.
That should not stop being the case. If you commit a crime like murder, we try you for murder, regardless of the reason. Okay? We may find that it was justifiable homicide, or we may find it was self-defense, or we may find this, that, or the other. Right? We may find you killed them in cold blood. But that doesn't change the fact that it was murder. Or homicide if it was justifiable. But why do you need an extra layer, an extra crime to give somebody? If you as a society determine, okay, there's a positive correlation between heroin addiction and armed robbery.
Which I'm sure society sat down and determined at some point in our past.
You'd like to think that. I doubt it, but probably somebody thought it out.
I would like to think that.
I'm far more inclined to believe it was an easy law to pass and it was a good gimme politically, but that's just me.
Oh, man. See, we're talking about heroin and now I'm thinking about prohibition and all the very positive, very logical reasons that people had against outlawing alcohol and all the minorities it was trying to protect and how well that worked out.
Yeah, prohibition.
Spoiler alert, it didn't.
Yeah, prohibition. Turns out outlawing alcohol doesn't stop men from beating their wives.
Yeah.
So if you find there's a positive correlation between an addiction and a crime, why is the solution
to outlaw the addiction?
That's
a
to
good
outlaw the
question.
addiction instead of to treat the addiction? Right? Instead of solving the problem, you've just added an extra layer of punishment. You've kicked the can down the road. Now, that's what governments do. They kick the can down the road. But that's not how you solve a problem. If you have a problem, you solve it. You don't take the easy way out and just make it illegal.
No,
that never solves the problem in any case.
I would agree with that.
I'd say that I'd argue that's the case for racism as well. It doesn't solve the problem. It just kicks the can down the road.
So for our heroin addicts, we should get we should probably get mental health counseling on board and maybe provide them some kind of life assistance, rehabilitation centers. We should probably remove the cultural stigma from those and make them easier for everyone to access regardless of insurance. I'm on board with all of these things. How are we gonna get rid of racism? Like, do we set up a counseling center for people who think they might be racist and teach them how to not be racist?
No.
Okay. I didn't think so. But what
we have not achieved Orwell status yet. We're close, but we haven't achieved that just yet.
I'm unfamiliar with that reference.
1984. Thought crime.
No, I don't. I'm not saying. I'm saying like, okay, you want to remove the legal ramifications from these actions. I'm all and replace it with alternative mediating programs. And I'm saying I'm all in favor of this. Let's give some examples and get this funded.
Well, so for diversity, I think we have proven over the last 40 years that you can solve problems that are institutionalized briefly. You can jumpstart the process with laws. I'm not going to argue that the civil rights movement, which resulted in a number of legislative acts, did a bad thing. I think it did a great thing. I am arguing that the present environment is such that further legal action does nothing to solve the problem. It, if anything, exacerbates it. I'm arguing for social change within society by members of society. I'm arguing that not governmentally sanctioned organizations take action, but that privately sanctioned organizations take peaceful action.
I was going to say, I think there are several private organizations that have been taking some pretty vocal action recently.
They have. Many of them have argued for legal change and have argued for institutional change. And I don't think that's the way to expressly solve the problem. I think it would be great if it would solve the problem, but I am just cynical enough to believe it won't solve the problem. And I think there are ways to solve it otherwise. Internal to society.
I think there might be ways that just as laws kickstarted some of the solutions in the previous civil rights movement, I don't see any reason why we couldn't get some Kickstarter laws to this particular movement. But let's not laws per se. Let's formally sanction some social programs, a lot of social programs, and let's make sure that those social programs have adequate funding to try to address this problem. A thing you will have to do legally somehow. A thing that will require our legal representatives to set aside money to solve. I'm all for your affirmative reward reconditioning, lead the horse to water solution. I like it. It's not a thing that will happen on its own without some kind of encouragement from a higher authority. In this case, I believe the federal government or state governments.
Well, and I was describing essentially tax incentives. Now there are cases where those sorts of tax incentives have resulted in catastrophic failure. The Equal Opportunity Home Loan program in the mid to late 90s ultimately resulted in the 2007 housing crash, among other things. So that didn't go all that well. But
yeah, let's be better.
If you can more responsibly implement a program that incentivizes inclusion, or rather incentivizes not being exclusive, right? It doesn't have to incentivize actively seeking out minorities.
Right.
Right? That's called being predatory.
It just has to incentivize not being a dick.
Right. If you incentivize the active seeking of minorities, you arrive at a different but related problem.
Yeah.
The predatory home loans are an example of this. I see what you're saying, where you're saying that we need some kind of what will ultimately amount to tax dollar appropriation for social welfare groups.
Yeah, I mean, whether you give somebody a tax break or you give somebody some money to start a new program, it's your solution, I think, is going to call for economic aid of some kind, which will require legality to enact.
That's not what I'm arguing for. I'm arguing for a process that goes something like this. A problem is observed. Some group of people becomes upset enough about it to be vocal. Whether or not they call for legal action is largely irrelevant. They are vocal enough to catch the ear of people in general. I don't need it to be legislators. It can be anyone. It just needs to be enough people to be meaningful. Those people then, in their daily lives, as they interact with others in ways that are relevant to the problem, need to then be gutsy enough to stand up for the thing they've just heard. I'm asking for personal responsibility. And I'm not asking for laws, and I'm of the opinion the world is a better place when people are forced to live in the consequences of their personal actions and aren't protected by the safety net of the law. If you're forced to be good by the law, you're not being good. You're being mindless.
But you're not hurting as many people. And at the end of the day, I'm not out to make laws that make you behave yourself because I want you to behave. I'm out to make laws that make you behave yourself because I'm worried about the people that will be hurt when you don't.
Yeah, and I'm arguing that if you don't behave, it ultimately hurts you.
Ultimately, but it hurts a hell of a lot of other people along the way.
Well, and maybe part of my philosophy does stem from the fact that there are a number of rules I would change, many of which we will discuss in future episodes.
Well, that does sound great. I'm afraid we're just not going to disagree on. I'm afraid we're not going to agree on this point.
I don't think we are. I think there's enough things that if I could have my way that I would change, that this would all work great, but they haven't made me dictator yet.
Not yet. But we've agreed that when they do, I get to be your PR representative.
I'm gonna need it.
I feel like we've pretty much beat this horse to death a little bit. But I would ask that our listeners let us know what you think. Send us any of your thoughts, again, to thelibbies@gmail.com, or tweet us at thelibbies, and we may read your comment on our next episode. So that would be pretty cool. And maybe you'll have a point that neither of us came up with that we should spend a few minutes talking about, and we can discuss that a little bit at the beginning of our next episode.
So until then, remember to speak your mind. Be prepared to change it. Keep each other safe.